Welcome to this week's edition of Coach Prep. Coach Don and I are here in the Cherokee Batting Range podcast studio getting ready to record episode number 228. I have a really interesting conversation for you today about team construction and the role that parents and families' financial situation has in how you put your teams together and if it should or should not. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about our sponsors. First, the Anderson Bat Company. Everything Fast Pitch is very proud to have Anderson Bat Company as our presenting sponsor. Anderson Bat Company is using the latest and greatest bat technology to corner the market in the fast pitch world. They have the -9 Rocket Tech, the -10 Carbon, and the -11 Carbon Light. Anderson Bat Company is using this technology to put a high-performing bat in the hands of hitters that really know the difference between a good bat and a great bat. We're also working with Anderson to provide a discount for all of our listeners. Go to the Anderson Bat Company website and order your bats. Use the EFP20 discount, which is for everything fast pitch, and you'll get a 20% discount. And again, make sure you take advantage of that EFP20 discount. It's a great way for you to help support the podcast and save that additional 20% on an already great product. Also, if you want to support the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. I want to say thank you very much to the patrons we already have on board. We would love to see some more people join in. You go to the patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. It'll take you through the steps. Coach Don and I really do appreciate it. We've got a lot of stuff in the hopper right now. Hopefully we'll be making an announcement or two here in the next couple of weeks. We have a new company coming on board that's going to be doing some giveaways and things specifically for our patrons that I think everybody's going to be really excited about. So Don, we're going to talk a little travel ball reality here because we know that the range of expense and the range of cost across what you can choose to do and not choose to do in the travel ball world is pretty much as widespread as in any possible discussion you could possibly have. There are teams that are relatively inexpensive and don't cost families very much money at all. There's other teams that are extremely expensive and you know, whether it's dues or travel or trips or camps or whatever it might be that are extremely expensive. And as you're putting your program together, as you're putting a team together, what's the role in and how much concern should you be having or thought? How much time should you spend thinking about whether or not what you want to do with your team matches up with what people on your team can really afford to do? It's kind of a sticky question because, you know, whenever we start to talk about, you know, what people make or how much they're willing to spend or, you know, how they choose to spend the money they have is a very personal thing.
Yeah.
And we had a discussion on Everything Fast Pitch several months ago now that a dad who had gone through the travel ball wars with one daughter and had a second daughter that didn't do travel ball at all, just played rec and played a little bit of high school. Both ended up, you know, many years later, one was a very successful business person and having a great life outside of softball, and the other one, you know, maybe not quite so much. But that he did sort of an accounting of how much they had spent from daughter A with all the travel, all the expenses, all the time off. You know, had a really in-depth study of their situation. And the numbers that were attached to what they had spent and what they had sacrificed was kind of jaw-dropping.
Didn't match up.
Yeah, well, no, it was, I mean, tens of thousands of dollars for a daughter to, you know, to play college softball, basically, is what they had spent all that money for. And the daughter that had played college softball was less successful of the two in the real world afterwards because the other one's experiences left her in a stronger financial situation. But anyhow, so we know that you can spend a ton of money on this sport. So the first question is from a coach prep perspective, when you're putting your team together, is it something you should be paying attention to? Should you be thinking about what can my people really afford
as we're assembling
the team and as you're assembling like your schedule for the team once you've assembled it? So let's say you're putting together a team and in your mind, you're putting together a team that's going to go all over the country. You're going to play, you know, in California, Colorado, Florida, Texas, wherever the big tournaments are, wherever the you know, the best teams are playing, you're going there to play. And you've got the kind of reputation as a team and as a coach that you can put together players that have that ability. So that's one end of the spectrum. When you're putting that team together, should it be something then that you're also going to be aware of that what that really costs and can everybody really afford to do it?
No, I think that's a really big question, Tori. And again, as you're assembling that team, you can find the athletes that are going to be, fit all those pieces, but are the families going to be comfortable with all those expenditures? Obviously,
Right.
is a big part of it. I've seen many situations where, we've had players that may not have had the opportunity to be a part of those teams, having others that are involved in the team able to help out, to bring them on board and to, help in some of those choices, but that's not always the case.
Right.
Again, I think it's an important part on both ends, from the coaching standpoint and from the potential player to be picked or trying out for those groups, that we're all aware of what's going to be expected and going into it. Because,
Right.
again, just like you said, it can be an astronomical number to make 2 or 3 or more of those trips every summer just to play that top competition from other states and to, continue that reputation that we've developed as a organization or as a group. And it can be stressful and taxable on, on a family for sure to want to be a part of that, but maybe not be comfortable committing to it.
Right. Well, I think from a coach's perspective, the first part of the argument is you get to decide what kind of team you want to coach. And if you want to coach that team that's going to be really expensive, then that's your choice. But you also then have to make sure that you're being really upfront and honest and direct with everybody involved with the team, that this is what it's going to cost and this is what it's going to take. And, this is the kind of commitment that it takes to be on this team. So there's no mysteries, there's no surprises. And then honestly, from a coach's perspective, I don't think it's really your job to try to decide for a player or their family what they should be willing to commit to or what they're willing to sacrifice or how much debt they're willing to take on to make it work. If you lay out a schedule and say, okay, we're going to play this schedule, and let's just say it's going to cost $100,000 for you and your daughter to play it. And if you sign on for it, that's what you're paying. That's it, period. By the time you get done with all these different things that we're going to do, it's what it's going to cost. And then if everybody's on board with it, they say, yes, we can do it. It's not your job to look at it and say, okay, but I know you only make $24,000 a year. What are you doing signing up for this team that's going to cost you 4 times what you make? It's not your position to try to judge whether or not that family should be on your team or not. It's up to you to be honest about what it's going to take. And then if they choose to take on that responsibility, then you have to hope that they're doing it with a clear conscience and, having thought it through enough that they're not, bankrupting their entire future just for a year of softball.
It's just tough. I mean, that's just a tough part of it for sure.
Right. Well, because part of it too is from a parent's perspective, you never want to feel like you're holding your kid back or keeping your kid from doing something. And I think the worst feeling in the world.
We all make those sacrifices through our lives with our kids.
And the worst feeling in the world would be like, my kid could have done whatever it is, but I couldn't afford to do it. I couldn't make it work financially. And I think that's one of those things that you feel as a parent.
But your story at the beginning kind of.
Right. That you're kind of a failure. So, but again, I think from a coach's perspective, put together the schedule, put together the team the way you want to play it. And then if people sign on, if they agree to do it, then you have to assume that they've thought it through. It's not your job to be their conscience about how they're going to spend their money, because I don't think that's probably an area that anybody really wants to venture into. Well, and the other thing too, from a coach's perspective, if you lay out what it's going to cost, you've got to do everything you can to make sure that you stay within those guidelines, because we all know what's more likely to happen. Let's say we're having a pretty good year and we figure out, well, we could go to one more national championship at the end of the year. We got a chance to, we can win PGF and the Alliance and the Bobby Sox and the Junior Olympic and the,
because we're that good.
We could be the only team that's ever won 4 national championships all in one year.
Thought we were only going to one. Tori.
Right. So so all of a sudden we start, sneaking up on additional expenses on down the road. And so from a coach's perspective, again, I think we've got to make sure that we're laying out exactly what it's really going to be. And we can't have because this is what I see all the time. Well, we took a vote. We got together and talked about it and decided that we were going to add one more tournament. Many, many years ago when I was still coaching at Parkside, I helped with a team, kind of, went to some practices and stuff like that. And I can remember very specifically, this is a really talented, like 14 and under team. And at the last practice before the national tournament, when they were scheduled to go to one national tournament, the coach came to practice, was super excited because they had found out that they had qualified for another national championship. I couldn't tell you now off the top of my
Big
head what they
tournament,
were, but it
yeah.
was like they were going to the AFA and now they qualified for the ASA.
Prestigious.
Right, something that was like a step above what they had been planning for. And I can remember that coach saying, well, this is something new. We weren't planning on doing, but this is the most amazing opportunity. You're never going to have another chance like this again. This is the coolest, most amazing thing ever. And we really should do it, but I'm not going to tell you we have to do it, so let's take a vote.
Right.
Well, how do you think that's going to go? All the kids want to go.
If it's not 100%, then it should be a...
Yeah, all the kids want to go, and all, and 4 or 5 of the parents are like, no big deal, I can afford it. And then 4 or 5 other parents are like, I don't know if I can make it work, but I'm going to say yes because
I don't want to say no.
I can't say no and disappoint my daughter, right? And so what ended up happening with that team, there was one family that ultimately couldn't afford the second national tournament, and one of the more well-to-do families basically adopted the girl and took her with them so that she could still go and paid for all her expenses, and she's, stayed with their family, and, they paid for her meals and all that stuff. I think they bought her an airline ticket if I remember correctly. So it was like a pretty substantial give from that one family, but of course they were in a position where they could afford to do it. But that's, again, part of this equation, because on every team, if you've got 12 kids on your team, 1/3 of them are really financially well off. They're successful business people. They probably got, enough money to do whatever they want to do. And then the middle group, they're doing good. They can afford it, but they can't really afford to go much beyond what the plan is. Mm-hmm. And then the bottom third is going to always be the people that are scraping by. And I tell this story. A couple of years ago, there was a girl I was working with that was on a really talented team. And she would come for her lesson, and I've always felt a little bit guilty because there were some weeks that I honestly felt like her mom was out there like looking in the car cushions for a few more dollars.
Sure.
Just to make sure she could afford to pay for her hitting lesson that week.
Yeah.
And they were doing that, in every area of her softball career to make sure that she could go, to all the tournaments and all the stuff that her team was doing. But so because we know the spectrum's going to be across those lines, that some people it's no big deal, some people it's okay, and some people it's a really big challenge, that if we throw it up for a vote, we're really putting people in a tough position. So
no doubt.
So I think it's something that we have to settle on, agree on, and live with, because if we keep adding, keep changing, keep adjusting, and all those adjustments end up being more expensive and costing more money, I think we're doing a disservice to some of the players on our team.
So if we cancel a tournament that's local and then say, well, we're going to go next weekend, but we're going to have to stay out of town to go to that tournament, that could put a lot of people in a pinch.
Yeah, because you go from a tournament, let's say that you can stay at the house, you can have breakfast at your house in the morning, you can probably eat dinner at home at night, you can pack some sandwiches and stuff and have lunch at the ballpark and cut down a little bit on all the expenses that way versus the...
Next week, we got rained out, so we're going to go next weekend.
And especially when we start adding in long-distance trips. So the idea, coaches, of it's not your job to tell people how to spend their money, but it is your job to be aware of the fact that every decision you make is going to affect them. The other thing about it that I think is, kind of coming back to the 3 groups we talked about, the last team I really was involved with helping coach, we were in Oklahoma City, as a matter of fact, playing. That was going to be one of our big trips that year. That was like, one of the special getaway things for the team. It was a very good team. But again, looking back at it, kind of the same breakdown that we just talked about. For a third of the people, money was no object. For a third of the people, it was comfortable, but it was something they thought about. And for a third of the people, it was really uncomfortable. They really had to scratch and claw to make it work. And so while we were there in Oklahoma City, one of the parents decided that they thought it'd be a great idea to go to this really nice restaurant to take the coaches out as a thank you dinner. And it was one of those places that I would never in a million years go to on my own because, everything was so expensive that to me it just, a steak is a steak. And whether it's at Longhorn for $15 or at this place for $115, I didn't appreciate the difference enough that I would spend that much money for it. But that's the restaurant that they chose. I was really appreciative, excited. It was nice, to know we were going to get to go to this really nice restaurant. I really appreciated them, wanting to, treat us as a thank you for what we had done. And we got there and we had a table for, 40 people, like a,
Big group.
like for the big group. 3 of the families, the parents were both there and their siblings. And 3 of the families, just the parents were there. And 5 or 6 of the families, nobody was there at all. So the table was half full. And that's when it hit me. So what ended up happening was, for a lot of the families, they couldn't afford to go to the restaurant that they were taking us to for dinner.
It divided our group.
Yeah, they kicked in, the whatever to pay for our dinner, but I felt bad then about them paying for my dinner because it put them in a position where they couldn't be at the dinner that was there for us to celebrate us all being happy working together.
Right.
And so the whole thing was because a couple of people that the money was no object that thought, well, we're going to show these coaches how much we appreciate them. We're taking them to the nicest steakhouse in Oklahoma City. Seriously, like the steak I ordered was like $125.
Right.
I mean, it was like, and it was, I mean, it was
It was
good.
a steak.
It was good, but it was a
Yeah,
steak.
yeah.
I mean, I've grilled just as good a steak at my house in my lifetime. And I really appreciated the thought, but in hindsight, I really wish we had gone to Longhorn,
Well, no doubt.
so that everybody could have gone. But again, the team dynamics that we're talking about in that world, we have to always kind of keep that kind of stuff in mind. And again, it's not for you as the coach to say, well, no, I really don't want you to be nice to me. I don't want you to, to say thank you and let's go to McDonald's instead of Johnny's Shishi Steakhouse.
This is a good conversation for everybody.
And it's kind of the moral to the story about why this is something that from a coach's perspective, we've got to do everything we can to lay it out for everybody involved that this is what it's really going to cost and to try to make it as consistent and in concrete as we possibly can. And I know, coaches, stuff happens, stuff changes, but every once in a while, I think we lose sight of the fact that the decisions we make thinking that they're good for the team really are not good for the whole team.
Be mindful. Yep.
Right. And if it's not really good for the whole team, then some of this other stuff we talk about, last week we talked about team bonding and team building activities. Well, if something that should be a team bonding activity ends up being a team dividing event because half the families can't afford to do it, well, then what have we accomplished? Right?
It takes 2 of our team bonding outings off the table.
It probably destroyed the benefit we had from the other good stuff that we did to build them back up. And so, the whole idea of when you're putting your team together, put your team together, put your budget together, and stick with it. Or if you're going to do something that's going to cost more money, you need to figure out a way that you're going to pay for it.
Fundraising.
Right.
Yep.
Whether it's fundraising or a sponsor or something else. When we start talking about things like dinners and thank yous and banquets and stuff like that, let's just make sure that, that those kinds of things were thought through in the planning for what it's going to cost us up front instead of the surprise expenses on down the road. Because nobody's ever going to try to say no. But we got to make sure that we don't put them in a position where they have to decide, well, we can play softball or I can pay my mortgage.
Yeah, the hug and a smile is something I remember.
Yeah.
Right?
So hopefully that gives you something to think about. As we wrap up number 228, please make sure you support our sponsors, the Anderson Bat Company, and patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. Become a patron if you can. Please go to our fastpitchprep.com website, order your Square Cuts training discs there. They're $49.95 a dozen. Also have access to the YouTube channel and the blog posts. Please make sure you reach out to us with questions, comments, ideas, thoughts, and for Everything Fast Pitch Player of the Week nominations at everythingfastpitch@gmail.com or fastpitchprep@gmail.com. So for Coach Don McKinley and our producer Stan Lewis, this is Coach Torrey saying thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.